Hello, and welcome back to our study of the sonnets of Shakespeare. We are currently going through the first cycle of sonnets that are sometimes known as the marriage sonnets or the procreation sonnets, in which the speaker of the sonnet is urging a young man not to spend his beauty and spend his youth on himself, not to waste his days, not to waste what God has given him, but rather to spend it in marriage and in procreation, in having offspring, having children. And now in Sonnet 4, this theme continues, and yet it takes some real interesting turns, especially by the end, in the final closing couplet. This one begins with a negation here. Unthrifty loveliness, why dost thou spend upon thyself thy beauty's legacy? So it begins with a negation, a negative, which again sets the tone of the sonnet. The speaker here is admonishing the young man. He's rebuking or correcting his behavior, that we get a sense of this young man being wasteful. He's unthrifty in his loveliness, that he is wasting his beauty, wasting his time in the pleasures of life, all for himself, rather than giving himself over to marriage, giving himself over to having children. And the speaker says, unthrifty loveliness, why dost thou spend upon thyself thy beauty's legacy? And this opening question, there are several questions throughout the whole sonnet, but this opening question really packs into it the primary theme of this particular sonnet. Why do we spend upon ourselves our beauty's legacy? This is a great question. Why do we do this? Why do we spend upon ourselves thy beauty's legacy? And there are a couple things to notice. First, we have the introduction of this language of finance, of profit, of love as currency that's introduced here. Terms like legacy, bequest, lending, largesse, usury, sums, and so on. We have audit and executor of estates mentioned. So the whole sonnet has this weaving language, this motif of finance, of money spent, money borrowed, hoarded even. And that's introduced here, that the young man's beauty is his legacy, is nature's bequest given to him. So it's something that he has inherited, not something that he has created for himself. And that's important to notice, that the speaker here is reminding the young man that the beauty that he's been given, that is such a rich gift, that he is so handsome, he has so much potential, that his beauty and loveliness and youth is a gift, that it is not something that he has given himself. He's on the receiving end of it, and so he ought to be grateful for it and to use it wisely, to steward this gift appropriately. And it's the sense that he's not stewarding it appropriately that serves as the catalyst for this sonnet. And so we get that introduced at the beginning. Why do you spend upon yourself thy beauty's legacy? Is spent on himself. But it's this prepositional phrase here. Why dost thou spend upon thyself thy beauty's legacy? This prep phrase here seems to be the whole problem. Because again, his beauty is a gift stewarded for him to use wisely, that he is meant to give himself away in marriage, give himself away in his life's work, give himself away in the raising of children, and in ensuring that his legacy continues. If we're talking about the motif of the inheritance here, if that metaphor that Shakespeare is drawing, then that it's very important to protect your inheritance, and sort of common sense would say it's important to actually pass it on to bequeath your inheritance. The concern that we'll meet at the end of this sonnet is that of taking your inheritance into your tomb and thus wasting it, bringing it into death for it to no longer be of benefit to anyone, and certainly not of any benefit to your descendants. That the beauty that you might pass on to your children and grandchildren as an inheritance, it all stops if it goes into your grave with you. And so this notion of spending your beauty's legacy upon yourself, this seems to be the primary problem, that of self-enclosure. That you are completely solipsistic, you are consumed with the self to such an extent where you are not open to others. You are not open to the world around you. You are not open to your fellow human beings. And you are certainly not even open to your own image in your offspring, your own namesake, your own sons and daughters. You stiff arm by spending your beauty's legacy on yourself. As we saw in a previous sonnet, you do that by negating their existence, by refusing to reproduce. You are, in effect, removing yourself from future humanity. You're removing yourself from others and completely becoming caved into the self. This is a problem that theologians and philosophers, Augustine would be one, Martin Luther, have termed it the state of being incurvatus in se, to be curved into the self. And this is what's happened with this young man. He is wasting his loveliness by spending it upon himself. And why do we do this? It's safe, one answer might be. It is certainly a risk to give oneself over to marriage, and it's certainly a risk to give oneself over to become a parent. It is a cost. It is sacrifice to your time, sacrifice to your energy and your body. We don't quite know why this young man is being hesitant, but we know he is being chided for his hesitance a certain way by the speaker here. One other thing that we notice too is this very multisyllabic name or description of the young man in the opening line here. Unthrifty loveliness, why dost thou spend upon thyself thy beauty's legacy? We'll see it again in this line here. Profitless usurer, why dost thou use? And so the structure of the sentence is the same in each of these lines, but notice how multisyllabic this name is. Profitless usurer, unthrifty loveliness, that the form of the lines undergirds the content, that this young man is being admonished by the speaker for hoarding all of his beauty, all of his value into himself. And so these descriptions, these terms that are being given to him, similarly in each of these lines, seem to swallow up all of the syllables. Remember, with iambic pentameter, we only have 10 syllables per line. And if 6 of those 10 syllables are dedicated just to restating who this young man is in terms of his character, in terms of his actions, in terms of his choices, then that only leaves 4 syllables for the remainder of the line. And so he is, in effect, crowding out everything else by hoarding in all of the sound to himself. Unthrifty loveliness, why dost thou spend? Profitless usurer, why dost thou use? All we're left with are 4 monosyllabic words that still are able to land the accusation. Why? Why are you doing this? Why dost thou spend? Why dost thou use on yourself rather than spend and use on others? So let's continue. Nature's bequest, nature's gift, right? This legacy that he's inherited. Nature's bequest gives nothing. This is an interesting assumption here. Nature's gift of beauty, nature's gift of time, it gives nothing. It lends. which again carries forward that language of finance, that pecuniary diction. But also it gives us this larger insight into human nature. This anthropological statement of Shakespeare is that what we have is on loan, that life is a time clock, that it is a timed event with eternal consequences, as Matt Whitling says. And so what we have been given from nature, we have been given on loan. Nature does not give us, it lends us, which means, of course, that we have responsibilities to steward what we've been lent, but also we only have a set time in which we have it. That at some point it will be required back of us. You think of Marlowe's great play, Christopher Marlowe's play, Dr. Faustus, where Faustus is under the illusion that he has infinite power, he has infinite knowledge, infinite wisdom. But he seems to forget that at the very beginning of the play, his bargain with Mephistopheles is that at some point his soul will be required of him. That all of the pleasures of life that he's been given free rein to indulge in is temporary. And at some point, the contract will be up, the contract that he signed in blood. Same here, the same principle, that nature's gift, the young man seems to have forgotten that it's been lent to him. And being frank, being generous, she lends to those who are free. Nature bestows liberally, freely, generously to those who in turn will bestow generously and liberally. This reflects back on the parable of the talents. If you think back in Matthew 25, that great parable that Jesus tells, where essentially to whom much is given, much is entrusted, to multiply. It harkens back to the original mandate in Genesis to Adam and Eve, to be fruitful and multiply, turn 2 to 4, turn the garden into a globe, subdue the earth and fill it. That original mandate to the first parents back in Eden is hearkened again in Jesus' parable with the talents, where one man is given 5 talents, one man is given 2 talents, and one man is given 1. And the 5-talent man is rewarded, as the 2-talent man is, for multiplying their investment rather than hoarding it in the ground. It's the one parable man who buries his talent in the ground, and he's chided for that he's rebuked by Jesus for that. And so this sense in which it is our responsibility or our duty to receive what we've been given, not given as a gift with which to do whatever we want, but receive what we've been given as something to steward, as something to manage responsibly, and that responsible management is multiplying it. And so here Shakespeare is calling on those biblical themes with this young man. He has been given a great gift in his loveliness, in his beauty, in his bounty, and yet he's hoarding. He is burying his talent rather than multiplying it. And in this context, multiplying it would be through marriage and procreation. So nature's bequest gives nothing but lends. It doth lend. And being frank, she lends to those who are free. So this repetition of lending, he's really emphasizing that notion. Then, beauteous niggard, why dost thou abuse the bounteous largesse given thee to give? So again, that question, why? Almost more aggressive than what we've seen in the previous sonnets, that he's putting on this full assault on the young man. Why do you spend it on yourself? Why do you abuse the bounty that you were given to give? This wording here is fantastic. What is the use of beauty? What is the purpose of beauty? Well, one offer from Shakespeare is that we were given it to give. What's the purpose of life? Well, to spend it, to live it, to give it away, to serve, to pour out. And notice too, beauteous niggard, which is another word for a miser, somebody who's being stingy. The bounteous largesse, profitless usurer, all of these terms are really unnecessary. We've established the young man's situation, and yet Shakespeare keeps loading these lines with all of these multiple syllables, all clumped together in reference to the young man, so that what remains is a fairly direct indictment on what he's been doing, but it's also a very limited one. We only have a few syllables left for the accusation because of how much space and time is being hogged by these terms. Why dost thou abuse the bounteous largesse given thee to give? It's an abuse of the gift when it is not given to others, when it is not multiplied and expended. Profitless usurer, another 6-syllable term, just like this one, unthrifty loveliness, profitless usurer. Why dost thou use so great a sum of sums, yet canst not live? So the irony there is that you use a sum of sums. You're spending and spending and spending, but because you're spending it on yourself, you can't live. You can't make a living, right? Because it's not being spent in the market. It's not being spent in the world. It's all just being spent inward. It's, again, being incurved. So it's not useful. It's not going out into the world. It's all just circulating back into the self in this sort of cyclical, spiraling, self-funneling way. Why dost thou use so great a sum of sums, yet canst not live? This bounty, and again, for Shakespeare, the beauty is a bounty. The language of wealth, in a financial sense, is connected to his beauty and his time. And so it's a sum of sums that he's been given, and he's using it, but because he's using it on himself in this sort of self-indulgent, autonomous, sort of self-sufficient sense, he's not able to live. He's just crumpling within himself. And that leads into this final quatrain. For having traffic with thyself alone, thou of thyself, thy sweet self dost deceive. Now notice what's happening here. This central problem that was established in the first 2 lines, you spend upon yourself your beauty's legacy. This gift that you've been given to steward, you are mismanaging, you are abusing because you're spending it upon yourself. He returns to in this last quatrain with 2 more prep phrases that further emphasize the central problem. Why dost thou spend upon thyself, having traffic with thyself alone? Thou of thyself, thy sweet self dost deceive. So that's the problem. All of your loveliness is spent upon yourself. All of your traffic, your relationships, is only with yourself alone. And therefore, of yourself, you are yourself deceived. So that's the 3-step process. You spend on yourself. You have traffic only with yourself, and therefore you are of yourself deceived. That you lose the thing that you idolize. This is an important theme here for Shakespeare. That because the young man has made of himself such an idol, that if you think in Aristotle's terms, that he has become the end for which he does all of the things he does. The ultimate end in itself has become himself. That is the ultimate aim, the telos, the purpose of all of his actions is for his own gratification. And because he's done that, he's made of himself an idol. That he has become in himself the whole point and purpose of all things. And because he's done that, he loses the very thing that he's aiming at. He loses the target by making the target himself. And so he is of himself deceived. Then how, when nature calls thee to be gone, what acceptable audit canst thou leave? Now notice the return here of something we saw earlier. Nature lends, we saw that in line 3. Nature's bequest gives nothing but to lend. Well, now here's nature again evoked. But now nature calls thee to be gone. So nature has lent to the young man his beauty. We saw that in line 3. But now we saw also that nature lends time in line 11. And here, there is a set time, there is a moment in the future when nature will call upon that loan, that it will receive payment. Nature calls thee to be gone. That the young man has been given a gift of time for a spell, and at some point, nature will bring that term to contract. It will bring it to its payment, and he will have to die. And when that time comes, the speaker says, what acceptable audit canst thou leave? What evaluation of your estate? What assessment of your worth and value? What sum? What inheritance will you leave behind? None. Because again, if it's all hoarded, if it's all curved inward, then when he dies, it dies. And the whole point of beauty being shared, being magnified, being poured out, and thus being made generational and even somehow eternal, that it will linger even beyond his grave in the beauty of his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren. All of that is for naught if he hoards it, because when he dies, nothing will be left behind. And so he summarizes that whole concern in the last couplet. Thy unused beauty must be tombed with thee. Remember, he's with himself alone. So all of his unused beauty, this unstewarded gift, will be tombed with thee. When he dies, it dies. But then we have this prospect of an alternative. It doesn't have to be this way. Thy unused beauty must be tombed with thee, which used lives the executor to be. If this beauty is used properly, not improperly, not as a self-gratifying, self-indulging means to a personal end, a selfish end, but rather if it's used in the biblical sense, that it is given to thee that you might magnify and give on to someone else, that your talents might be invested and magnified and expanded, that it might benefit more than just you, it might go beyond you. If used, lives the executor to be. There's a great play on the accent here because in these last two lines, thy unused beauty, the use is unaccented here. Thy unused beauty, the emphasis is on the negation, just like at the beginning. Thy unused beauty goes to the grave, which used lives the executor to be. So now it's accented. If we have the right emphasis, the right understanding of use of our gifts that we've been lent, if we take the proper stock of what we have been given in this life, beauty, time, relationships, traffic with others, exchanges, again, this whole language of finance, if we have the right understanding of spending and receiving the gifts of life, our time, our relationships, our beauty, our talents, then it lives, which used lives the executor to be. It will be executed. It will be effected. If not, it will be tombed. It will die. So, thank you again for our look at sonnet number 4. Continue to stay tuned as we progress through the sonnet cycle together.